Ben and Matt right before the service started that I feel like we couldn't have done this on our own, you know. And so we're so thankful for the support that we've gotten from our community in Seattle, from our families, and from the larger community, which we consider you guys to be a part of. I don't think I can even count all the ways that we felt really encouraged and supported by everybody. Just to know the people that are praying for us, to know that they actually care. You know, I can't imagine how lonely it is for people who are going through a struggle like this and don't have the kind of support that we had, because it can be a really discouraging place. I mean, I remember when we first got the diagnosis, and you know, to hear the words cancer stage 4, it's a very difficult piece of news to receive. And you know, everybody kind of knows what that means. The doctors don't beat around the bush when they're explaining it to you. And yet, you know, I shouldn't say we always felt hope. There's definitely times of discouragement. You know, I think that's one of the things I wanted to share a little bit about. It's just that, you know, it has been a bit of a roller coaster. Most of the time, we felt very hopeful. We felt peace. But I'd be lying if I stood up here and said, you know, we just trusted God 100% that things were going to be perfect. You know, it's a scary place to be in. But what I will say is that I feel like God was really faithful. You know, when we had those low spots, He would always pick us up, and so I think that's something that I've been realizing, I guess, through this whole ordeal, is just that living this out faithfully is an active process. It's not just a passive thing where you get to sit back and say, okay, God, take care of it. I remember very early on, and I felt very encouraged by Heather. If you guys followed her Facebook posts, you probably know how strong she's been and how much of an encouragement she's been to other people. I felt the same way myself, getting encouragement from her, and sometimes I felt guilty about that as a husband. I wanted to be there to be, you know, be a rock for her, and I felt like more times than not she was being the strength for me. But one thing that I think we both realized pretty early on in this process was that we had to decide very early on, were we going to live in a place of discouragement, despair, because it's very easy to be there, or are we going to trust for good things to come, that there is hope, that God will bring us through this? And that was an active choice we had to make. And it wasn't just a one-time choice, that was a choice that we had to continually make, and we're still making as we go through this. And so I think that's one thing that God's kind of shown me quite clearly. It was, it's been a very, very active thing, you know. Faith is constantly making those choices to trust that what God says is going to happen. And what else do I want to share? Yeah, I think it's been, like I was mentioning a little earlier, it's been so encouraging to us just to know that people are out there praying for us in so many ways. People have reached out to us that we hadn't spoken to in years, you know, and just to know that they've remembered us. And I think I couldn't add it up. I mean, we've probably got hundreds of people out there that have been praying for us. And it was a lot of the little practical things that people did as well were very, very encouraging for us, because I think something that we didn't probably stop to think about is how much of an impact this would have on our entire lives. You know, I mean, you kind of think, okay, yeah, cancer, it's going to impact Heather. She's going to feel miserable for months while she's going through the treatments and just the effects of the cancer and everything. But it really touches all different areas of our lives. You know, she would be feeling low, and so I'd be doing what I could to support her. I'd be spending more time with the kids, getting them ready for school in the morning, getting them put to bed at night. And so just some of the practical things around the house, even just doing the dishes and the laundry and that kind of stuff tends to just pile up or just not get done. And so we had people, local friends in Seattle that would step up and just come and help us doing some of those practical kinds of things. I was even mentioning right before the service started, my work actually was pretty good. I work for this very large corporation in Seattle, and I never really expected them to do anything great for me. I thought maybe I'm just kind of one of the numbers, but my boss was very understanding, and they let me take off as much time as I wanted, like not vacation time. I didn't have to use any of my vacation hours, just if I needed to go with Heather to a doctor's appointment, or just take off a little early just because she needed me to, those kinds of things. They were really understanding about that. And so I feel like God was gracious in the sense that He brought people into our lives, or just the situations we were in, and I think He supported us in ways that we didn't even necessarily know we needed. And I mean, Heather, look at her now. She's doing great. We know we're not out of the woods yet, but I really feel so thankful for where we are at. And I think that's one of the things that I still feel. It's still, from time to time, it's easy to get discouraged, but now we've got these different moments over this last 10 months where we can look back and we can clearly see, here's miracles that God has done. He has been faithful, and it's easier now, I think, to have hope moving forward, saying, look at all the things God's done already. He's not going to just drop us here. He's going to keep going forward. And that, that's really encouraging. I just reflect on small things sometimes, and I think what I've found over the last 10 months is that it's easy to look at these things from different perspectives. On one perspective, you can say, this is a miracle. God did this. This is amazing. There's no other buddy but God that could have done this. And then if you start feeling low, you can look at it from the other perspective and say, oh, we've got good doctors that we're working with. Somehow it was the medicine that did this, or and so it's interesting. One thing I guess that's occurred to me, and this is maybe going down a rabbit trail, but I remember reading the Bible stories about even the disciples that were with Jesus when He was performing these amazing miracles. And then the next day, it seems like they were full of doubt again. I was like, how could they do that? And I feel like I'm kind of living that a little bit right now. And so I understand a little bit better. It's easy to doubt the things that God's doing in our lives right now. But one tiny example, I think of this as a little miracle anyway. It's like Heather's hair. She might be embarrassed that I'm sharing this, but her hair right now, she's had so many people come up to her in the last month and just comment like, "Oh, who's doing your hair?" And this is just the natural result. This is how her hair grew back in. It's curly because of the chemotherapy she was on, and it's got these natural color highlights in it because it just came in a different color. And so, you could look at that as a very pragmatic person and say, that's just what happens after you have cancer treatment, right? But I think it's a blessing, her hair could have come in any different ways, right? But it came in really nice, beautiful, exactly, yeah. And so I think that's just a tiny example, I think, of showing us that God cares about the details, exactly, right? And I feel like I'm still processing so much about this. I don't know that I've really been able to grasp everything that God has been doing, but I feel like every couple of weeks there's just one little nugget of truth that kind of just God reveals to me. It's like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. And I think probably the biggest takeaway has just been that But God is there with us, even the times where we do feel despair, we feel discouraged, and God usually shows up to remind us that He's still there with us, and that there's always hope, no matter how gloomy things might feel. So, yeah, that's all I'm going to share.
Yeah, it's. I was thinking about today a little bit, and I do feel like we could probably share for like 6 hours. And you don't all want to sit here for that long, so we won't tell all of them now. But I remember around a little after this time last year, I had my appendix out on moving day. And they said my white blood cell count or something was up, but they thought it was just from the appendix. And basically, we didn't catch the cancer then. When you first get diagnosed, of course, you go through, some shock, because I was certainly not expecting. And I felt tired for months, but I just figured it was 3 little kids and a really busy Daphne. And moving and all of that stuff. You don't assume it's something more serious. But we actually had a trip. Sean and I had a trip, which was a huge blessing. And my sister was watching our kids, and we went to Portugal. He had a business trip, and then I got to come along. And we just heard the news the day we left that they were like, so there's something really suspicious. We want to do biopsy. And I kind of asked, like, is there a chance it's not cancer? And they were like, it's really concerning. And they kept giving me these super serious faces, and you're like, oh, I guess that's kind of So I'm a therapist before all this, like my professional world, and so I was thinking, wow, the body language I'm reading is they're all like really worried, okay? So on that trip, we were really prayerful, but I also kept feeling like, Jesus in the garden before the cross, and not to be too dramatic, but I felt toward this, like, Lord, could you just take this? Do I not have to have this? I prefer, as we all would, I'd prefer not to have this path, right? I really don't want to do this road. Could we just say, oh, it was one of those crazy, we thought it was, but it wasn't cancer, right? But I also just felt like such peace from God of saying, like, hey, Jesus knew what the cross was going to do, right, to save all us, and he still didn't want to do it, right? He was still, and he wasn't like rebelling against God, right? But he was just like, this is really going to be really hard. I don't want to walk down this path. We'd all prefer an easier road. But then also feeling like God just was so clearly like, I'm with you and you're not alone. And as we got the diagnosis, I had a bunch of friends who I remember them feeling like we're overwhelmed and in shock. And I felt, in some ways, I felt a lot of peace. One thing I kept praying is that it wouldn't be something rare. Because my mom had died from a really rare cancer years before. Now it's 7 years ago, and so I just kept praying, like, Lord, please don't have it be something rare, because that felt to me like kind of pushed a button right in you of like, that seems way harder. If it's super rare, just scarier. Whereas when they called me up, and I'm a big gardener, and they said, you have garden variety breast cancer. I said, garden variety? What does that mean? They're like, basically the most common kind you can get, that's what you've got. And I was like, okay, that actually gives me like a certain amount of peace. I felt like kind of that part was a relief. And then I think at that point, they were kind of assuming it would be stage 2. And so you're kind of starting to prepare your mind in a certain way. Okay, so we'll have to do these certain treatments. We'll have to do probably surgery first, then chemo, then radiation. It's going to be a long year, but you kind of felt, okay, starting to get your mind ready for this. But I kind of had this feeling deep down, both that I was going to be okay in the end, and that I kind of felt God was telling me it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think I told Sean that and a few close friends. And so when they called me to say, actually, we found it in more places, it's in 9 locations, you're like, oh, whew, I guess it's getting worse before it gets better. Okay, but I felt like in a strange way, I think for me that also triggered a whole different side for me of saying, hey, I'm going to be really open with my story in a way that I might not have been. If it's stage 2, I think I have a little certain part of me that I just, I don't know. You don't want to be like overly dramatic or something. I don't know. There's that streak I have at times. And then you're like, oh, I don't need to have too much attention. But then you're like, okay, if it's stage 4, okay, tell everyone every grandma. I have friends who live in Kentucky and they're a church, and this little lady keeps sending me letters, and you're like, thank goodness for, Elizabeth in Kentucky who is praying for me and sending me letters. Like, how sweet. right? And you just kind of feel a little bit more the sense of like, oh, all hands on deck, right? We don't know what God's doing here, but we know that we can't do this alone, and we need people praying for us, and we need people walking with us in this. And so right around that time, my sister dared me to wear my Wonder Woman outfit to treatment. And when she first said it, she was like, I dare you to wear your Wonder Woman outfit to treatment. I was like, what? I was like, that's so ridiculous. And I was like, why not? I'm like, okay, sure. I mean, because it did help. I remember we just seen the Wonder Woman movie, and there's a scene, if you haven't seen it, where she like goes over no man's land. And right before it, she has this like determined look on her face, and she's like, okay, I'm going in. And so it was actually really helpful, I think, for all of us in a sense of like, okay, we're really determined. We have God with us, and we're going at this with everything we've got and everything God's giving us. And then, so I wore my Wonder Woman boots today, not the whole outfit, guys, but these crazy tall boots. So when you walk into the hospital in a full Wonder Woman outfit, you have some really interesting conversations with people you would not have. Trust me. Because people are like, they'd be looking at you and they'd be trying to decide what you're doing, and they'd be like your outfit. I'm like, you have to be a superhero to fight cancer. Or, just sort of sometimes sarcastic comments, but also really these heartfelt conversations. And then the whole staff at the hospital, we really had some really beautiful interactions. And the first day we went in for treatment, we had a whole crew of friends with us. And they had all bought Wonder Woman t-shirts that had capes on them, like Mom has. I think some of you have seen it before, her wearing. And so that's pretty impressive, too, to have this whole crew show up in the hospital with their Wonder Woman capes on. And so the staff was like really surprised. And there was a man in the waiting room that I didn't talk to, but I guess he'd seen us. And 3 months later, he came back in for another treatment and saw my sister in her t-shirt and asked if he could come meet me. And he said that he had seen us that first day that we come in, and he said he'd seen just a certain amount of sort of joy and okay, we're gonna do this, that really inspired him because he'd gotten a really hard diagnosis. I don't remember what kind of cancer. I don't think he shared that part with us, and was feeling really discouraged. And his wife, was the only day she couldn't come with him to treatment, and he was just feeling really low. He said seeing us and that kind of spunky, hopeful spirit that our group as a whole had, he really felt challenged. Okay, I don't need to give up. I'm gonna live life to the fullest. And he said he'd really kind of dug his roots in more into faith, and really had changed his approach to dealing with his treatment. And I feel like some of these sort of things kept happening, right? Things that you don't know are happening and you find out later that you impacted this person. Or I had people reach out to me on Facebook who are just getting diagnosed with breast cancer, or who are waiting on serious test results, and we found out they didn't have it, but reached out in a way that they never would have if you weren't sharing your story. Because of, I think some of you know, Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot, the woman who played that role, found out about our story from a friend of mine who's an artist, and made some flower petal artwork in our honor, and they did an interview with her, and so she sent us her autograph. And one of the coolest things for me from that is they posted it on this blog in Brazil, and so I had all these families and women and men from Brazil who started following me on Instagram and sending me these really sweet messages. We're praying for you in Brazil, and we believe Jesus can heal you. And one of them, her name's Abuela6 something on Instagram, and she always, every time I post something, she likes it, or she'll send me little messages. And she's a grandma with 6 grandkids, and I mean, those sort of moments that you don't expect. I didn't have any friends in Brazil before this. I mean, just sort of these moments you're like, wow, okay, God, and I don't know. And that's one thing that is amazing and inspiring and humbling, is just you put your story out there and you don't know what God's going to do with it. And I've certainly had some moments where I have felt, and I still feel that, oh, my story's not that amazing. I mean, it's amazing, but again, sort of that other people's stories are about writing a book. I had some moments should I really do this with my time, or and then I kept feeling God giving me peace, yeah, you should write a book, this is good, this is a way to honor what God has done and the other stories of people who have cared for us. And I mean, the stories that I haven't shared yet is a mile long, of people's thoughtful gifts and kind words and ways that they've tried to encourage us. so I feel we've been praying about that. Like kind of people have kept asking me, so are you going back to work? And I'm like, not yet. I feel like this is my new work, is to kind of continue obviously healing and taking care of myself and our family, and also to tell some of these stories. And we had really looked for some good books to read to the kids last year about cancer and about, hey, mommy has to go through surgery and this sort of thing. And I didn't find anything that I particularly found really helpful. I just think it's good for kids to, it would have been nice to have a few books that kind of said, hey, like for Daphne, sometimes you really want mommy to pick you up from preschool and she can't. But mommy still loves you. You can feel two feelings on the same day. You can feel happy that mommy's getting well and sad that she couldn't play with you today. Or again, it's just confusing for kids sometimes, right? Like, remember Cora? Really didn't like it when I lost my hair. No.
Because in one part, she had some more hair left and some bald.
It did. I looked kind of weird. Creepy, I think was the word used. She was like, you look kind of creepy. And I was like, I agree. This is not my best look. Do not sign up for this if you can help it, But I think even that, just to see this is part of the process. And I think sometimes it's easy to make, I just think it's such a huge gift to the world. I think to say that you can feel two feelings at the same time. You can feel grateful that you're getting treatment and really sad that you have to go through it. And that you can feel really sad your mom is bald. And that you don't want her to come to your school without a hat on. That's okay, right? And you can feel really grateful that she's getting well and her hair's coming back. And so I just think the process has made me feel like that's a gift that we could offer. Like there's a need there, I think, for some better supportive things for the families going through it. And I also want to do an interview book with kids like ages 7 to 12 about what do you wish you'd known about your parent going through cancer. I think that will be, again, really helpful. And then I also feel like someone asked me, what are your goals for your books? I'm like, I don't know. I read this book my grandma gave me years ago, and it's called Starlight Through Shadows, which I was an English major, so even the poetic name I just love. I'm like, think about that, right? Starlight through shadows. Like there's this hard time or darkness, but there's still starlight coming through. And it was written by a woman in the 1880s when she was going through a lot of health problems, and she never saw it published. So her sister published it after she died. And she'd said, I'm going to work for a while on my book for invalids, is what she called it. And she has this passage in there all about kind of people offering her dewdrops of God's goodness. Like that she was in this drought and that she was getting dewdrops from other people of God's goodness. And she's like, sometimes I'd really like a full rainstorm. But God's just giving me dewdrops, but it's enough. And so I do feel like that this year. There's times where we got, I'd say, rainstorms. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then there's some times where you're like, wow, this is hard. You feel parched. And then you get some dewdrops of God's kindness and goodness. And this one is hard to keep up with. And then we'd have a friend come take her for a play date for the afternoon, wear her out and bring her home or something, And so I feel really grateful for all of God's goodness with that. And I had one scripture I was going to read that has really encouraged me this year. This is from the Message version, which I really enjoy sometimes because it can just put it in a little different words. Colossians 1, 9 through 12. You want to read it?
Be assured that from the first day we heard of you, we haven't stopped praying for you, asking God to give you wise minds and spirits, attuned to His will, and so far through
Thorough understanding
of the ways in which God works. We pray that you will live well, proud of you as you work hard on His orchard. As you learn more and more how it works, you learn how to do your work. We pray that you'll have the strength to stick it out over the long haul, not the grim strength of gritting your teeth, but the glorious it is strength that endures, but unendurable, and spills over into joy Thanking the Father who makes us strong to take part in everything bright and beautiful that He has for us.
So I don't know if you caught the end there, but one of my favorite parts of that passage is this idea of we pray you'll stick it out over the long haul, not the grim strength of gritting your teeth, but the glory strength God gives, the strength that endures the unendurable and spills over into joy. Thanking the Father who makes us strong enough to take part in everything bright and beautiful that He has for us. I think at the beginning I had some people even ask, like, why do you think you got cancer? And, sort of asking the why questions. And of course you do it yourself too, because you're like, well, how could I have avoided this? Or how can I make sure it doesn't come back? And I felt like God said, you're asking the wrong question. It's like, that's not the right question. And Jesus saw the paralytic, and the Pharisees were the one who were asking, did this man or his parents sin? And Jesus said, that's not the right question here. The question that, like, this happens so the glory of God can be made known. I think sometimes we can get caught up, or I know a lot of people who question faith, like, how can you believe in God if bad things happen? I'm like, you're asking the wrong questions, You're getting caught up in something that isn't the most important thing here. The most important thing is you're not alone. God is always with you. And it's not my place to come to someone else and lecture them or tell them, God's going to bring something good out of this, but just to say you're not alone and we're with you. And I think God will, in their own heart, help them get to that place of seeing what could come out of it or how God could be glorified. So I do feel really thankful that a lot of doors are going to open that I never would have walked through. I never would have written a kid's book about cancer. I never would, who knows? I just feel kind of at peace that, like, okay, this has started a whole new path through my life I wouldn't have picked out, but I think it's going to be really good. I already feel really at peace and really, like, grateful that, okay, this is work I am uniquely prepared and called to do that I didn't expect. And I feel like for all of us, just having again that piece of, like, okay, God is going to give us what we need, and He's calling us to work that only You can do. And I think sometimes we get caught up in trying to figure out the end step. And if you'd asked me a year ago, are you going to write stories about kids about cancer? I wouldn't have known that was going to come up. But I'd be like, really? I don't know. I can't think about that yet, right? So sometimes just really being, like, faithful with your next little teeny step. All right. Thanks so much.
I'm just going to share one other little thing, just from kind of I guess where we are right now in the treatment process. We started, I don't even remember, when did the chemo start? Was it September or was it October?
Usually October.
So we went through 2 different rounds of chemo. The first round lasted 2 months, and then she started another round that lasted about 3 months. Then she had a little break from the chemo while they did some tests to see where things were at. And that was, for us, that was a pretty scary point, because we'd been going through this really difficult treatment. The chemo they were giving her was pretty aggressive because the type of cancer she had, even though it was garden variety, it was aggressive in the sense that it was working fast. And so that was a scary point, because we've been going through this painful process for 5 months and without really any clear sign of what was happening. And so we were hoping for really good news, but we didn't know until they actually were able to do the scans. It's still kind of raw, apparently, but the results. The doctor was so excited by the results that she had to call Heather. She couldn't wait for her actual next appointment to come in. And the words they used were complete metabolic response, which meant that they couldn't detect any more cancer in her body at that point, at least not with the technology that they were using. We know now that there's still a few microscopic little bits of cancer in her body, and that's why they carried on with some more treatment. She had 3 separate surgeries after the chemo, and that was part of the plan all along. The chemo was the first thing they wanted to get in there, and the advantage of the chemo treatment was that the drug's still flowing through the heart, so it attacks it wherever the cancer is located. They knew all along they were going to go in and do surgery because they also wanted to physically remove the tissue from where the tumors had been located. Now, happily enough, the chemo was so effective, and give the credit to God for that, that when they went in to do the surgery, they couldn't find the tumors anymore. So they had to put special markers in using scans and stuff. They had to put markers in her body so that they could remove the tissue around the marker because there was no tumor anymore to remove. And then after that, she went through the radiation. The purpose of the radiation was partly a belt and suspenders, but it was also to treat the areas. She had a couple of spots on some bones where the chemo or not the chemo, the surgery, they couldn't go in and physically remove the bone. And so the chemo had been effective there in those spots, but the radiation was kind of like, let's give it an extra dose of something just to try to kill it for good. And so that's the point we're at now. She finished radiation a month ago now, a month and a half. And so we're, the next major step is in September, she'll go back for another round of scans. And that's where the doctors are going to follow up and say, what's been the net effect of the surgery and the radiation? And of course, we're believing for good news. But I just wanted to give you guys an update. That's where we're at from a kind of medical standpoint. So appreciate continued prayers, because this is still going to be a little bit of a road ahead. She's going to be on different kinds of, even once she goes for those scans, she'll be on hormone therapy and different kinds of drug treatments for probably several years.
I'm going to say for probably 10 years. They're like, we're going to follow you with a fine-tooth comb forever. They said, but for the next couple years, they'll do scans every 3 months, and then maybe they'll extend to 4, then 5, and kind of thing. So they said the first 5 years are kind of the most critical. In the
So I'm gonna be 70 when you're done?
apparently, yes, she is. She doesn't miss a beat.
We'll,
Almost being adult by the time
Yeah.
you're done.
Yeah.
It's a good memory, just a distant memory. So anyway, just want to give you guys a heads up that we'll continue to provide updates periodically through Mom and Dad. So, thanks again.
So, actually, Luke, if you sit here, we're going to do our cancer prayer. And then everybody, we're going to gather around and just going to ask God to finish what was started. And, yeah, let's finish. Finish it. Thanks for all going on this one. Yeah, we'll gather around.
I still get
Okay.
More hands on deck.
Too bad.